Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then, you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I feel like I've been having a lot more connection with my listeners through the Q&As and polls. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Hi, I'm Father Daniel Duplantis, a Catholic priest, martial artist, and host of the Karate Priest podcast. Have you ever wondered what the church teaches about different topics? Are you a martial arts enthusiast or just someone who wants to learn more about martial arts? I'd like to invite you to join me and many guests on my podcast as we cover topics of faith, everyday living, and martial arts on the Karate Priest podcast.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Season 4 of A Catholic's Perspective, the podcast all about being a young Catholic surviving in a secular world. Today's topic is going to be really fun and interesting. Today, we're going to be discussing long-distance relationships, and to do that topic with me, I have my friend Cecilia. Welcome, Cecilia.
Hi.
Hi, it's so great to have you on. I think this is we just recently became friends over the course of a few months, but it's like we've connected on such a good level, which has been great. And, you know, having long distance friendships, I think is completely different from long distance relationships.
Yeah.
But before we dive right in, did you want to introduce yourself to the listeners real quick?
Yeah, so my name is Cecilia, and I'm a Wisconsin girl, and I've been married for a year now. But before I got married, I spent high school discerning religious life and was in a monastery for a year before discerning out, and got married a year ago. So just wanted to chat with you guys about long distance, because I've been there and done that.
You've experienced it. You know exactly what we're talking about today, because it's a hard topic. And because of social media today, I feel like it's a topic that's becoming more relevant than it was, I guess, when I was a kid, or, you know, even in the last, I don't know, online dating really took off in like the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember it being a huge thing until like 10 years ago, so to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess we'll kind of just like jump into it. And did you want to tell the viewers about your own story, your own long distance relationship, how you guys met, how all that went?
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of all happened, I guess it was all providential, because it was interesting how it all happened, because I had been out of the monastery for several months, discerned with other communities, discerned that I should start discerning marriage. And a friend of mine, knowing that I wanted to start moving towards dating and stuff, was like, hey, there's this Catholic dating site. Have you ever heard of it? And I hadn't. So I just went on and made a profile. And I didn't expect anything to come out of it. It was kind of one of those like, well, we'll give this a shot, you know? And yeah, my husband had already been on there for a few months before I even went on. And the funny thing is that I posted at the end of June, and I almost waited until July just so it could pop up with the new month and everything. But my friend was like, nah, just go for it. So I did. And my husband told me like June was going to be his last month posting his profile, and then he was going to remove it and just kind of be done with it. So
really just like get on there.
Yeah.
I love it.
So yeah, and I was just really attracted to him because I think a big thing in online dating, I especially noticed it with the guys, is that they want their profile to be like, I work out, I'm so strong, I'm, and that's great, guys. Like, we want a strong guy. But what attracted me to Brandon's was that he was like a simple guy. He loved his faith. These are his hobbies. He loves his dog. You know, like, it was just very straightforward. It wasn't all fluffed up, you know, which, like I said, is probably fluffing things up is pretty common in online dating because you have to create an online person for someone to encounter.
Yeah, a lot of the guys act like dude bros on there, and like and then they're just like, oh yeah, you know, I can lift 200 pounds, so I could definitely lift you. And it's like, thanks. Okay. Cool story, bro.
Yeah. So that actually became a joke between Brandon and I now. He'll say, like, I lift heavy things. I'm like, you're impressive.
I love it.
But yeah, so like just that straightforwardness is what attracted me to him. And then from there we were just chatting, you know, first we stayed on the forum, you know, and chatted through there, but we were chatting like every night for a couple hours because we just clicked right away. And then from there it went to texting and phone calls, and like our first phone call was like, I think a 2 or 3 hour call, just because we loved hanging out.
I mean, that's to be expected.
Yep. And then after that, like phone calls and texting all the time, and then eventually Zoom calls, and all of that stuff just really helped us spend time together. And then that was in June of 2020. And then the following July, I moved out to Montana where he was from, because I was from Wisconsin. He was from Montana. So the next year I ended up moving out there simply because like he had a career, an apartment, and I was still living with my family after coming home from the monastery. So I didn't really have roots down like he did. So I was like, I'll go live in the mountains. Like,
I'll do that. Why not? I would too.
Yeah. So yeah, that was kind of how everything came together. And then I moved there July 2021, and then we got married May of 2022. So we had like a year of living closer. And yeah, and then now we're back in Wisconsin together.
Wonderful. Yeah, I definitely think that, you know, couples need, especially if they are long distance, they need to find the time to come together when they can. I think it depends on the difference in where, like why they're long distance. Is it because of the military? Because that's completely different. You know, you can't just move out to wherever he's at if it's because of the military. But I guess what kind of advice would you have for someone who's considering to like getting into a long distance relationship? Maybe they're not in one yet, but they're considering it.
Yeah. So first of all, I would say don't get involved with anyone that's further than you would ever consider moving. Because when Brandon and I first started talking, the initial plan was for him to come to Wisconsin right away. When I moved to Montana, I was never sure if we would even end up back in Wisconsin. But Montana wasn't too far for me, you know? So like, if you're looking at dating online and someone is from overseas, you have to ask yourself, yes, the initial plan could be for them to come move to where you are. But if things were to change, would you be okay with moving to where they are? Because once your heart is involved, it makes it a lot more complicated. So just kind of, you know, filter profiles by that and just have that in mind going into it.
Yeah, that's really difficult to discern too, because especially if you really like a person, you're going to be like, I'll move anywhere for you. Yep. But then you actually have to, and you're like, ooh, so I said that, but. And it's hard. It's really hard because how far away are you from your family? Are you guys like close to your family in Wisconsin?
Now that we're in Wisconsin, we're 2 hours away.
Which isn't bad at all, right?
No.
Whereas I guess if you were in Montana, even though Montana's not far either, I know people who have dated from basically they were in California and the other person was in Pennsylvania. And I was like, that's actually across the United States.
Yep.
And they didn't understand the distance because of the long distance. You know, they were always talking and stuff until they actually mapped it. And then they were just like, okay, is this something we can actually do? Because they're like, oh, we should meet. And then he's like, well, I'm in Pennsylvania. And she's like, well, I'm in California. And oof, that's really tricky to try and discern that. did I know you said that you were would you have been okay moving out to Montana with him, like doing all of that?
Permanently,
Mm-hmm.
I was fine with it. I struggled with it, but because I loved the landscape so much, I think that part of it, and we had a really good community over there too. So
Yeah.
that, however, the one thought that really broke my heart about, when I was thinking we would be there long term is once kids were in the picture. Because
Mm.
one thing to just have me, like, I know my family knows me, like, talking on the phone is fine, like, I can get on a plane and fly. But once kids are in the picture, even if you're visiting once a year, the kids grow up so fast and they wouldn't really know them, and you can't load a whole family to fly regularly because it's expensive. So that was the one thing that I struggled with, because
Mm.
like I said, I was fine it just being me out there, but with kids, even 2 hours feels too far. I'm like, I
Well,
just
it's a
want to
lot. And I think nowadays we don't have enough support for young moms, to have the kids because people are moving out all across the United States. Before, I mean, even 50 to 100 years ago, what they would do is if you moved out when you got married, but you would move to the top apartment of your parents' building, or you would move down the street from your parents. And, nowadays there's this very, independent lifestyle where you get married. Sometimes at this point some people don't even do that,
right.
and then you move like miles and miles away, and it's one thing if you actually want to do that, but it's another thing if it's because your significant other can't go anywhere because he doesn't have a job anywhere else or she doesn't have a job anywhere else. So that's a really hard thing to kind of discern. What kind of advice would you have for somebody who is in a long distance relationship?
For that, I would say just like keep prioritizing that time together, because when you're in a long distance relationship, it feels like more time needs to be invested because you can't just hang out shopping or like doing just
Yeah.
daily life stuff with each other. It has to be time that you actually are available to be on the phone or to be Skyping and stuff. Brandon and I always did a Friday date night Skyping. He would get a fish dinner, I would get a fish dinner, and we would have it together and watch I think we worked through a whole sitcom series too over Skype. Just that was our show, we'd hang out and do that on Saturday nights, so just Skype was the biggest thing, for closing that gap. But just being intentional about it, or like sending each other cards and stuff, that was another big thing for us. It feels like it takes more work, but it also leads to a deeper connection, I think, too, because you are so deliberate about it.
Mm.
So
No, it's so true. I think also like so many people can become lazy with their relationship when they don't see them in person. I mean, even in person, you can be lazy with your partner after, seeing them for a while. You just, you don't do anything after a while. But
yeah.
I feel like it's easier to fall into that, or maybe not. I don't know. Do you think it would be easier to fall into that if you're long distance or not? Because you actually do have to be intentional and text back and all that stuff.
I don't know. I do think it's easier to get lax when you're together, because like when we were apart, we were very deliberate about Friday being date night and about
Mm.
like about the stuff we did together, whereas once I moved to Montana, we were just kind of chilling together anyway, so it's like we don't have to go get fish dinners, like we don't have to
Yeah.
make a date, we're together anyway,
You don't have to put in the
um
effort. Yeah.
right. So I think there's a lot more of like casual being together versus deliberate being together when you are in person. So yeah, I did feel like it was a little lax at
Mhm.
first when I moved to Montana, but Brandon's like, we're together just like we were before. I'm like,
It's a little different now.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, no, that does make sense because when you're long distance, you really want to keep the other person's attention, right? Because you're not there with them and they're around other people all day. So how do you stand out to that person, even if you're not necessarily dating them yet, but you're interested in it?
yeah,
That can be really, really difficult to kind of stay in that person's mind, I guess, like just for them to remember you because you're not around.
exactly.
Which is honestly why when college happens and long distance relationships now happen, this is why I always say it's not a good idea to date in high school. Just because it's like you guys are probably going to end up going to different colleges, going to
Yeah.
be long distance. and it's just never going to work out, and it's unnecessary heartbreak. Now, I do think dating is necessary to figure out who you like, because I think that's important too, but you also already know who you like. And if you're dating someone and it's not them, then you're just going to be like, okay, well, it's not you. So,
Right.
peace.
Exactly.
But I think a lot of times, especially teenagers today, they get caught up in the emotions of it. And it's not necessarily the person themselves these days. It's like the thought of being in a relationship, especially with social media being the way that it is today.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of young teens and even young adults, they latch onto the idea of being in a relationship, but they don't realize how much work it takes. And then they go long distance and it's even more work.
Yeah.
And me and Max, we're about like 45 minutes away from each other, but it can be anywhere between an hour and a half to 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So it just depends on traffic. But the distance helps us, and we always say that if we lived closer together, we would not get anything done because we would literally just be hanging out the entire day.
Yeah.
And even like a couple days ago, he came over and hung out, and we were able to get a lot of work done. For the ministry, he helps me with my videos and things of that nature. But even then, it's like, we still were goofing around and hanging out and stuff. And so sometimes distance can be helpful, but yeah, that's just something that I've always realized. But somebody asked me recently, like, if you're in a long distance relationship, how do you avoid going overboard with affection when you do see that person? Because if you really love them, it's just a natural response. But how do we keep from like smothering them?
Well, the biggest thing for Brandon and I, well, first of all, in the case of everyone's different with what they like for affection. I'm a hugger. I get that from my dad. Brandon's more reserved. But so it depends, just knowing what you want, what they want, as far as the amount of affection and hugs. As far as when it comes to like chastity and not crossing the line because you have so much pent up affection for this person. When I went out to visit Montana for the first time, which was for Brandon's confirmation, which is why I went out there to be there at that Easter vigil, we had like an honest conversation before I flew out, and we're like, what are our boundaries? What is okay and what's not okay? I stayed at a hotel. I didn't stay at his place. He did not come up to my room at the hotel with me at all. Like when we got back from like Holy Thursday Mass or like Easter Vigil, we sat in the lobby to chat a bit more, but then he walked me to the elevator. I went up to my room and that was it. And yeah, just kind of having boundaries on how far physical affection can go. And we even had a plan, like if we were, getting too caught up in the moment, he had a balcony on his apartment and we're like, we'll step outside for some fresh air, like if we feel we need to like get out of the more enclosed environment,
Yeah.
So just like having an honest conversation about these things and what your expectations are for limitations, because it is so easy to get caught up in the moment, or there might be a fear of, I don't want to make them feel rejected, like they're just trying to show me how much they love me, but you have to have an honest conversation about the boundaries and what that's going to look like for you guys,
Yeah, I think that's so important today. I don't think enough people understand like boundaries, but then also knowing someone's intentions, right? We have to ask people like, what are your intentions? Especially if we don't know someone's intentions, that's probably not a good thing.
Exactly.
If they're not intending to date you or marry you or get engaged, whatever, like maybe you should question why you are with that person. In that sense. But also I like what you said about the boundaries thing, because everyone is different in the sense of boundaries. But you shouldn't, what's the word? You shouldn't become laxed in your boundaries just in fear of like not being able to communicate your love language to someone. You know what I mean? It's like, even if they don't agree with your boundaries, you should not lessen those boundaries just because they disagree with it. If anything, you probably shouldn't be with that person.
Exactly.
And that's where it comes down to is it's like, okay, what are their intentions? Is it to actually be serious in a serious relationship and get married one day? Or is it to like play around?
Yeah.
And that's something that people really need to figure out. I'm definitely not a super affectionate person, but Max's love language is physical touch. So we're always holding hands. If we're sitting on a couch, his arms around me. That's how he shows physical affection. And it's something that I appreciate because he likes it, but it never goes overboard,
Right.
And that's why I appreciate it too, because despite the fact that it's his love language, he never uses his love language as an excuse to push the boundaries.
Mhm.
And, some guys and girls I've heard have done that before, in my friends' past relationships where they set a boundary because they didn't like a certain thing. And they're just like, well, it's just my love language. You're just rejecting me because this is my love language. And it's like, that's not true. That's actually a manipulation tactic.
Yes.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I've definitely realized. And so it's like, don't sacrifice your boundaries and your own um, standards, I guess, for someone who doesn't respect them as well. Because if they love you, they will respect the boundaries you set up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that can be really hard because I know some couples are like, "Oh, I don't want to kiss anyone until I get to the altar. I only want to kiss my wife." And I'm like, "Okay, well that's great, but the other person might not agree with that." And it's like, "Okay, but why?" Like if it's just a kiss, it's not making out because making out's a
Yeah.
mortal sin, we know that.
Yeah.
Then what's wrong with it if you want to have a wife? If she's going to be your wife, right? You see her as your wife, why wouldn't you want to give her a kiss every now and then?
Mm-hmm.
Um, is it because of like pornography? Because pornography's running rampant and you think it might be a trigger for you? And if that's the case, maybe you shouldn't be dating. It's those rabbit holes you can really go down.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
It's
And
just
the boundaries are going to look different for everyone because people struggle differently,
Mhm.
and yeah.
Yeah,
It's,
because someone might be like, "Oh, I'm okay sitting on a couch by ourselves, like watching a movie."
yeah.
But you go to another person, they're like, "We can't do that because
Yeah.
something else." And it's like, okay, well, if you can't be alone in the sense of, and like not be tempted to go further in a sense, maybe
Mm-hmm.
question if you're ready for a relationship. Now, I'm not saying that if you slip up, like you're not ready for a relationship. Couples, like we've said, have got caught up in the moment. They go to confession. They're like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It happens. It's the physical attraction's there. It's going to happen. But if you have no self control at all and every little thing is going to set you off, maybe question if you're ready for a relationship or not, because those things don't go away in marriage.
Right. Yeah. And that was the thing, is that like even when I moved to Montana, I had my own apartment.
Mhm.
We didn't move in until after we got married. But I pretty much only used my apartment to sleep at because I hung out so much with Brandon. Um, and we never, like, we were fine
Yeah.
hanging out at his apartment by ourselves. It was never cause for concern or temptation for us. And, I know a lot of things will say, like, don't be alone together, at night. But, like, Saturday evenings, it was winter, it got dark early. And it's like, I don't feel any more tempted just because it's dark outside. Like,
Yeah.
we're still
People
just
say
here
that.
eating dinner, watching our show. Like, whether the sun is out or the moon is out, like, it doesn't affect me.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing too, is that also I think it's been built up in people's minds over the years, like, don't have sex, don't do this, don't be alone in a room together, don't, you know,
Yeah.
it's almost scary when you are, because then that's all you can think about.
Yeah.
It's that whole, I don't know what it is. It's a psychological thing where if you're told not to think about something, you think about it even more.
Yeah.
And it's like, maybe we should instead be giving these people the tools and let them know when they're ready to date versus when they're not, instead of just telling them like, don't do this, don't do that. This is dark. Don't do, 'cause
Right.
again, everybody's different,
Right.
so what might affect you doesn't affect him, or what affects me doesn't affect you. It just, you really have to discern for yourself and not lie to yourself. I think a lot of people lie to themselves and they'll be like, oh, I'm fine, or oh, no, I'm not fine. But
Mm-hmm.
they don't actually know. It's just a fear thing.
Yep.
So
Oh,
I noticed that too. And then also so this was a question that somebody asked me, and I wasn't really sure because I was like, I think it depends on the situation, but should the guy solely be the ones that visit, or should it be mutual? Because I know you went out to go visit Brandon, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he hadn't been confirmed as a kid, so he got confirmed the spring after we met, and
Oh,
wanted to be there for that, you know.
yeah.
Again, I think that is a situation thing. Like, you have to look at, you know, if you're not going to be staying together, overnight, which is not a good idea. What do the accommodations look at if you go to him? What do the accommodations look at if he goes to you? Look like if he
Mhm.
goes to you. So that's one thing to consider. Also, financially, I mean, I was able to go out to him because he bought the plane ticket for me. I was in college. I didn't have money
Yeah,
to
I feel that.
to fly to Montana. So finances play another big role in that too. So I don't really think that it can be like he's not a gentleman if he won't fly to me.
That's a big one today too.
Yes. And, but if you're both in the same place, say you're both, 28 years old, you both have money, you both are able to get a hotel at either place you stay, then that would be more of a 50-50 situation. Because I think it's important, if they're always coming over to you, you're not going to have the opportunity to have an insight into their world. You're
Mhm.
going to have this person isolated from their environment, their family, their friends. And those are people you want to get to meet. So I think more 50-50 would be a better balance, just so that you do have the opportunity to visit where they're from, and the chance to meet their family, the chance to hang out with their friends, and just kind of see them. Because, we just tend to act differently depending on what scenario we're
Oh,
in, and
yes.
see them, relaxed in a comfortable situation that's familiar to them with their friends and stuff. You get to know them better versus always seeing them in an unfamiliar place around unfamiliar people because they're always coming to you. So I
Right.
think that's a consideration to have too.
Yeah, I think that's important because also, like I said, like I can be an introvert with people I'm not familiar with, but an extrovert with people I am familiar. We're kind of similar in that
Yeah.
aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like I would always be different, whenever I never really had long distance relationships, but Max always commented how I was different in a group setting versus just one-on-one, and he
Mhm.
appreciated that because he got to know that.
Yeah.
Um, and so for people who aren't taking the time to go into the other person's world, like you're saying, and like learn about that side of them and how they act around their friends and their family and their people, I mean, you definitely should make that a priority. You don't have to go out there tons and tons of times, but
Exactly.
at least get an idea of what they're like around other people that you're not familiar with, and then they'll know how you react around strangers. It's like that back and forth thing, but I agree. I don't think guys should be this like only ones who put the effort into going and visiting the significant other. I think it should be mutual if possible. And if you can't, meet in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
But I definitely don't think that's all on the guy's shoulders.
No.
Um, and especially if the woman can pay more than the guy can, depending on like, okay, is she out of college? Is she in college? Is he out of college? Is he in college? You guys are just going to have to make that decision together, but also just don't automatically expect that every guy has like tons of money to spare,
Exactly.
because especially in today's economy, it's not how it works.
No.
Um, but I guess the last question we have is how far is too far? And that could be taken two ways, but specifically distance wise, how
Yeah.
far do you think is too far? I know we talked in the beginning kind of about like if you're not willing to move out to where that person is permanently or where they plan on going, then probably don't consider dating them. But how far is too far for you?
For me personally, I wouldn't have gone outside of the US. Just so that anything would be feasible to drive if need be. Um, but again, looking at it now, I don't even think, I don't know.
It's
Looking at
hard.
it from the perspective of being far away from home and having kids, um,
Mhm.
that's what adds another factor, because you have to keep in mind it's not always going to be just the two of you. And like I said before, I would have zero problem spending the rest of my life in Montana, if it were just going to be me. But once there's kids in the picture, like, I want my family around. I want them to get to see them grow up, because I don't want it to be, those grandkids or the nieces and nephews that are like a baby, and then next time you see them, they're like walking and talking, because things go fast when they're little, So it all comes down to what you value most. And also, just because someone does live close to you doesn't mean you'll stay close to family for your whole life either, because job opportunities come up, things change, so there has to be, like, of course, a baseline flexibility for that regardless. But as far as like putting yourself in the situation in the first place, it pretty much comes down to what your priorities are. And
Right.
also looking at stuff like, I was homeschooled, so my mom was like, what are the homeschool laws like in Montana? That's something to think about, and do you have a good Catholic community there? Do you, if the nature around is important to you, like, is it important to raise your kids in the mountains?
Right.
Like what is most important to you? And then from there you can decide, is this too much of a distance for me? And like I said, you can't really go off of when you're first talking with the person and like, oh yeah, I'll totally move over to you, because like I said, that was the plan for Brandon and I. When I was wrapping up the year that I was in college, he was applying to jobs in Milwaukee, but ended up deciding that it was best for him to stay in Montana career-wise. So the plan that we had thought was going to happen totally changed, and I ended up over there, which was fine. But again, you can't go off of a idealized plan, or like those early days where, like you said, Amber, like, oh, I'll move anywhere for you, because it's just not going to be realistic. You need to ask yourself, if like, am I fine living?
Right. And also
whatever.
like having those realistic conversations.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it can be so easy to get our heads in the clouds and to just be like, oh yeah, I love this person. Like after a few weeks of just me like talking to them and, really wanting to get to know them better. And that's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. But we also can't have on the rose-colored glasses. We have to realize that, what is this going to look like if we actually made it work? Because it's nice to text somebody and to Skype with somebody, but then to actually make it work, is a lot of effort.
Oh yes. And even just like going from long distance dating to in-person dating, because like Brandon and I were able to share in a lot of stuff over Skype, like our meals and watching our shows together, watching a movie. But once we came together in person, then it was like, how are we going to spend our weekend when we have work? Like, I wanted to be out hiking, he wanted to relax at home, like, neither of those are bad things, but that's not something that's going to come up when you're long distance. Like, you can do oh, how do you like to spend your free time? But as far as like the concrete reality of what it will look like when you're in person is something else to keep in mind too when you're long distance dating. Walmart trips were controversial when I first moved to Montana, because he just wanted to go get food. I wanted to browse the clothes area. I wanted to browse everything because it's fun. School supplies.
Well, we're women. We love doing that.
Exactly. And he's like, I have never been in this section of the store.
Well, there's a first time for everything, Brandon.
Yeah. So just little things like that like, and now I can say we can peacefully go to Walmart and
that's good.
It is okay. But just little things like that are not going to be something that comes up over a long distance relationship, that you really do need that time. Like we had that year, with it not being long distance before we got married, and it gave more of like what life together is going to look like. Even though we connected right away, long distance, like none of that changed. Like when I moved to Montana, even when I visited the first time, it's like, this is totally Brandon. I didn't feel like I was with a different person than I had been communicating with. It just kind of felt like we had always been together. So
that's how you know.
Exactly. So there wasn't any of that with him. But as far as like settling into day-to-day life, that was things where we learned more about each other.
And I definitely think that's something all relationships go through, but more so when you're in a long distance relationship because you're so used to the internet version of them, and it might take you a little while to, get used to them not being on your phone, and then I think, I don't know who said it, but one of my friends had an issue where she basically did what you did and moved out to where he was, but then she had a hard time connecting with him in person because she just viewed him as a guy on her phone. And she had this like split reality type thing where people on her phone are different than people in real life for her. And so it made it really hard for her to connect with him. So she had to like basically start from scratch. And it wasn't because he was different necessarily. It was because he wasn't on her phone anymore and he was in person. And so that's something hard that's, it's not easy to navigate that either. And especially in our world that's saturated with electronics and social media, it can be very hard to make those in-person connections, especially when everything's been digitalized. Now we have all this AI stuff, and it's making it really hard for us to connect with human beings.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So it's just absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I guess, do you have any last words for anyone who might be in a long distance relationship or anything?
For those who are in it, like it's not impossible to end up married. So I know a lot of people are skeptical of the whole thing, especially like our parents' generation and stuff. They're just like, what? But it can work if it's the right person, if it's gone about the right way, and if you do make time to actually live closer to each other before you get married. Like, I wouldn't say go straight from long distance into marriage, because there's going to be a lot more surprises than generally are at the beginning of a marriage to begin with, but yeah, and to people who are considering it, like, don't be afraid to try it. It does take more work, and sometimes it is harder to like have friends who have their, the people they're dating close by, or maybe someone interests you that's close by, but you already have this other relationship that you're in, so, but if it's the right person, it'll all work out.
Yes, I agree. And sometimes it's hard, but you know what? Some things are worth suffering for. So, and that's not to say if things are really, really, really bad that you should stay with the person, but I'm just saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
There's a difference.
Yes, there is definitely a big.
Well, thank you so much, Cecilia, for coming on and talking with us about this. I really appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. I love chatting with you about.
I know. It's so fun. We stayed on the phone, I think, once for like 2.5 hours because we just like talked
Yes.
so much. Like, it's so fun. And it's funny because we're both introverts.
Yeah.
It's like you never would have expected that, but it's how it works.
It works.
And then where can my listeners find you too? If like Instagram, right?
Yes, Instagram. It is Carmelite_homemaker. And I have.
Oh.
And.
Oh, you cut out there for a second.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Go ahead.
But yes, Carmelite Homemaker on Facebook and Instagram. So
perfect. There we go. Yeah. No, that's awesome. So definitely go check her out if you guys have not heard of her before. But with all of that being said, that's it for this episode. So thank you so much, Cecilia. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for listening to A Catholic's Perspective with me, The Religious Hippie. Make sure to visit my official website at thereligioushippie.com, and while you're there, be sure to sign up for my newsletter to keep up to date with my latest news and offerings. You can also find me on virtually any social media site as The Religious Hippie. Thanks for listening.
'Tis the season to shine with H&M. Discover the holiday collection and find fashionable pieces for your wardrobe or for under the tree. Get inspired and dazzle with this year's glam. From tuxedo styles, bow detailed pieces, impressive prints, and more. From unforgettable looks to unforgettable gifts. With fashion finds to home decor, find it all at H&M. Treat your loved ones and yourself this season. Shop in-store or at hm.com.
A quest is a search for something. And every week, the Quest podcast will show you how we know what we know through interviews with people that have incredible stories of dedication and perseverance. I'm your host, Todd Fisher. Join me in this thought-provoking and inspiring podcast of discovery. Find us anywhere you listen to podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Selling a little or a lot? Do your thing however you cha-ching with Shopify, the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/offer23.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Amber Rose and distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright by The Religious Hippie, NFP. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions stated in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure to visit the official website for The Religious Hippie at thereligioushippie.com or find me on social media for other unique content.